to In the Margins. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome as our guest today, Dr. Tomás Morales, who is president of Cal State San Bernardino. Dr. Morales, welcome to In the Margins. We are so grateful to have you. And of course, you have been at Cal State for quite a while. If I'm not mistaken, you arrived there in 2012 as president. And, my first question is, Dr. Morales, can you talk about your higher education journey? Because, of course, you have served as the top administrator at a number of institutions. But I was wondering if you could talk about your own journey through higher education and when you first became interested in higher education leadership in particular.
Well, thank you. It's I'll start my journey, my description of my journey as an undergraduate. I was born in Puerto Rico. I grew up in the South Bronx. I attended public schools throughout my entire career. I'm a proud product of U.S. public education. I attended the State University of New York at New Paltz as a student in the Educational Opportunity Program. And the EOP program, by definition, serves students who are academically and financially disadvantaged. So my parents could not afford to send me to college, and I was a student that was dependent on financial aid to go to college. And so I left the South Bronx and went about 90 miles north of New York City to attend college. And I was a beneficiary of some incredible mentors that really impacted my career. And after I graduated from the State University of New York at New Paltz, I served as a EOP counselor, an academic advisor. I was in the program that I participated in as an undergraduate, and provided academic advising to students that had a very similar background. And I left my first job in higher ed after 3 years to I accepted a position at Cornell University, where I worked for the Office of Minority Affairs, and I served as the Associate Director of Opportunity Programs at Cornell 7 undergraduate colleges, again, providing educational opportunity to those students that were academically and financially disadvantaged at a very selective Ivy League institution. And from there, I pursued an opportunity at SUNY Stony Brook, at State University of New York at Stony Brook, where I was served as the Associate Director of the AIM program, which was, again, the local name for the Educational Opportunity Program at Stony Brook. And 2 years later, I went back to my alma mater, SUNY New Paltz, where I assumed the directorship of the Educational Opportunity Program. And that's when I really began to think about higher education leadership, and that really became an opportunity for me to pursue my master's degree and ultimately my PhD in educational leadership. And I had a keen sense of the need to pay it forward, to pay the opportunities that were provided to me, the mentoring that was provided to me as an undergraduate, to pay it forward to other disadvantaged and underrepresented first-generation students. Frankly, could not have imagined that as a college freshman, I would be where I am today. I'm in my 46th year in higher education, and I've worked a number of institutions. I worked at the City College of New York in Harlem, where I served as vice president for student affairs. I then left the City University of New York and went to Cal Poly Pomona, which is part of the California State University system, where I served initially as vice president for student affairs, and then later had the opportunity to serve as vice president for academic affairs and provost, and then left and went back to New York to assume, and back to CUNY, back to the City University of New York, to serve as president of the College of Staten Island, and had a wonderful opportunity to serve the City University of New York on Staten Island, again, working with first generation students. And of course, you know, CUNY has a very diverse and historic role in public higher education in the nation. And then I left in 2012 to come back to California to assume the presidency at Cal State San Bernardino. And my journey continues.
Of course, of course, of course. And, you know, one of the statistics that jumped out at me is Cal State San Bernardino is very diverse. But if I'm not mistaken, percentage of students who are first generation college students, correct, is actually north of 80%. And I wanted to talk with you about the experience of the first generation college students in particular. You know, as we went through, and we are still in, really, in some ways, this pandemic, you know, some of the talk in higher education circles was the potential loss of a generation of students who didn't have parents who went to college, students who didn't have access to all of the supports that, you know, second, third, fourth, fifth generation students, college students have. I was wondering if you could talk about the challenge of the first generation student in particular. Since your time at CSU San Bernardino, I was wondering if you could talk about your leadership in really helping the institution be as prepared as possible for the unique challenges of the first generation students. I was wondering if you talk about how CSU San Bernardino serves the first generation student and how your leadership has played a role in preparing the institution to do so.
Yeah, I mean, that's a journey that continues. I mean, I think that's a challenge that we have. Serving such a large population, if you come to my commencement, to the commencement ceremony every year, I ask a standing question and I say to the audience, we graduate about 5,000 students every year. And I asked the graduating class, stand if you are the first in your family to earn a baccalaureate degree. Mm-hmm. And 80% of the graduating class stand up. Mm-hmm. And there's an incredible explosion of applause and celebration from the parents and spouses and grandma and grandpas and siblings. You know, we get about requests from between 8 and 12 tickets per graduate, because it's not just about the mother and the father and the parents or the spouse, but it's the brothers and sisters and cousins, you know, abuelo and abuela, grandma, grandpa, uncle and aunts that are coming to celebrate the fact that this member of their family is earning a baccalaureate degree. And I believe that Cal State San Bernardino transforms the lives of every single one of our students. And they go back and they transform their families, and their families transform the communities that they come from. And so serving first generation students is an ongoing challenge. We're far from perfect as a university community. But for example, one of the major challenges is the fact that first generation students have no one at home to talk about their experience. When my children went to college, all three of my children, they're now adults with their own children, when they were going through their undergraduate experience, they were able to call mom or dad and you know, talk about their experience. If they had questions about how to deal with a particular faculty member, or they were undecided whether they should change their major or not, they were able to talk to me or their mother and really get a better, you know, get advice. Many of our students have no one at home to discuss the challenges that they face in pursuing their undergraduate degree, or how they should pursue their graduate admissions application? Or what do they do when they're seniors and, do they go to graduate school, professional school, or do they go out to the world of employment, work? And so one of the challenges that we face at Cal State San Bernardino is to ensure that we have very strong academic advising and career counseling so that we can mitigate the fact that often students who are the first in their family to graduate have access to mentors and advisors and career counselors as they pursue their baccalaureate degree. I'll tell you a quick story. I meet with the president of the student government every month. And several years ago, a young man who was the president at the time, in one of my meetings, was talking about some of the challenges that he had as the president of the student body.
Mhm.
And I said, well, have you spoken to your parents about these challenges? And he looked at me like, and he said, Dr. Morales, he says, my parents don't have a clue about what I'm going through as an undergraduate student. And that made me realize that question was kind of a silly one on my part, because he was right. And that's not to say that parents of first generation students don't care. They care, they love their children, they want the very best for their children, but they haven't had that experience. They haven't traveled that road that every student who completes a degree, an undergraduate degree, travels.
One thing or one particular institutional support that is notable at CSU San Bernardino in particular is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Board. And so I was wondering if you could talk about why that board was formed and what institutions who want to make a difference in first generation, the lives of first generation students, the lives of African American students, because it's not just first generation. Your diversity profile at CSU San Bernardino is tremendous, looking at the sheer numbers of minority students that you serve. There are so many institutions, however, that are overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed by, fiscal challenges. They're overwhelmed by the challenge of really hiring a diverse faculty, right? A lot of times faculty is just not is not representative of the diverse profile of the students. And I'm reflecting even on my own undergraduate journey, searching out for a professor who looked like me. That was a hard situation, right? I was not really finding, I think there was one. And what happens? The students all overwhelm that particular professor's
Yeah, they
office,
gravitate, yeah.
And he can't publish and write his books and write his papers. And then when it comes for promotion, they will say, hey, what happens to your publishing volume? And this professor's response might be, hey, my service work is off the charts, right? I have to mentor all these students. So many challenges institutions are faced with. I was wondering if you could talk about the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Board and what institutions who are overwhelmed but want to make a difference can do to support diverse students.
No, I appreciate it. And what you're describing is a taxation of time of faculty of color who are working at institutions where there aren't that many, where they're underrepresented on the faculty. And so the students of color tend to gravitate to those faculty. And so, that there's been many articles written about the kind of taxation of time, if you will, that faculty of color experience, particularly at predominantly white institutions or TWIs, traditionally white institutions. And so when I arrived at Cal State San Bernardino, I was entering my second presidency, and I was surprised to discover that there was no chief diversity officer at the institution.
Mhm.
And, this was a time in 2012 where that was that was a position that was fairly common in most organizations, whether higher education organizations or the private sector, corporate America, hospitals, healthcare organizations. Very few organizations did not have a chief diversity officer. It used to be called an affirmative action officer.
Mhm.
And so I was surprised, given the population that we served, that there was no chief diversity officer. And I've had experience when I worked at the City University of New York. When I was the president of the College of Staten Island, I had a chief diversity officer who reported to me as the president. I chaired the City University of New York search committee for the system chief diversity officer. Have very high regard for the work that chief diversity officers did and contributed to an organization of higher education, to an institution of higher ed. But I decided to change my approach. And initially, I created two co-chief diversity officers. One co-chief diversity officer held the position of Chief Human Resource Officer, Associate Vice President for Human Resources. And the other co-chief diversity officer held the position of Associate Provost for Faculty Affairs. The former would work with the administration to increase the diversity of our staff and administration. The latter, the Associate Provost for Faculty Affairs and Development, would work with search committees to diversify the professoriate. And as you mentioned, that's been a real challenge in higher education throughout the country, is diversifying the professoriate. I think that's really a real challenge that continues today. And I later expanded the leadership of our DEI efforts to include the Associate Vice President and Dean of Students that really worked collaboratively with the other two co-chief diversity officers to ensure that the student voices were heard. And so, in my opinion, creating such a structure really creates a roadmap to institutionalize DEI at the institution, because it's not one chief diversity officer that often does not have a portfolio, but three co-chief diversity officers, one that is the chief HR officer, the other is the Chief Faculty Affairs and Development Officer, and the third being the Dean of Students. And we set out to create a DEI board of over 70 faculty, staff, and students. And the work of the DEI board is done through 6 subcommittees. So, for example, we have a DEI subcommittee on faculty recruitment, retention, and development. We have another one that's a second subcommittee focuses on DEI and staff recruitment, retention, and development. The third is DEI and student recruitment, retention, and graduation. The fourth is DEI in programming. In other words, how do that committee works with constituents and stakeholders throughout the university to develop the lecture series and programming and other activities that celebrates the institution's diversity. The fifth committee is DEI in curriculum and student learning to ensure that our curriculum is diverse and inclusive. And then the last sixth committee is the DEI and alumni and community outreach. So as I mentioned earlier, Cal State San Bernardino is an anchor institution to our region. It's stewards of place. So we're very involved. 80%, about 75% of our alumni live in the region. 85% come from the region, so we're a regional institution. We have a very special relationship with the community, and that relationship is manifested in a number of activities that we're involved. Our university community contributes over 95,000 volunteer hours in the San Bernardino, Riverside County, the Bi-County region, called the Inland Empire. And we have relationships with over 500 nonprofit organizations, including the 56 school districts we work with in our region. And DEI plays a very important role in that process, but we also have an Office of Community Engagement. Every one of our academic departments have different initiatives that support our community. For example, our accounting department, we have a very outstanding accounting and finance department. Our students for the past 28 years has provided free tax preparation to homebound senior citizens. And so this is one example. We're deeply committed to the community that we are serve and that we are part of. But creating these 6 subcommittees really is our attempt to institutionalize diversity, equity, and inclusion, to build a DEI culture into the structure of the university itself across all departments and divisions, from academics to recruiting to hiring to facilities management. We have had our 2 retreats. We're in our 3rd year of the DEI board. The first retreat, we had Kindi Ibrahim as our in residence. He spent the entire day working with our committees and serving as a keynote, delivering a keynote address. And of course, Kindi Ibrahim, extraordinary leader in this space. We provided every single member of the DEI board his book on anti-racism. We are now examining all of our policies and practices to ensure that they rise to the anti-racist threshold that he describes in his construct. And so, yeah, I mean, but it's a work in progress. Let me be honest with you. It's not something that, okay, you've reached DEI, you've done it, you can call it a day. No, on the contrary, because students are very transient, right? We bring students in every year. We graduate 5,000 students. We bring in 5,000 students every year. Half of our students are transfer students, so they come from the community college space, and so this is an ongoing work that we do. But what we're trying to do with this structure, and I think it's somewhat unique. Most institutions have one chief diversity officer that work very hard. I mean, I admire the work that they do. We've decided to create a structure where 3 co-chief diversity officers are very much involved as the chief student affairs person, dean of students, chief HR officer, and the chief faculty affairs officer, to work closely with the deans, the latter close working with the deans, department chairs, to diversify the professoriate. And we've made progress. We're not there yet, but we've made very, very good progress in diversifying our professoriate.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the goals that you laid out for Cal State San Bernardino when you arrived now a little over 10 years ago, how the institution has grown since you got there, and what you see for Cal State San Bernardino's future, given how things are changing so quickly. We talk about what institutions had to go through with this pandemic. We talk about how the demographic profile of this nation is changing. So many trend lines, so much change. I just wonder if you could reflect on the goals you set out when you first arrived and what you see for Cal State San Bernardino's future, given what's happening both in your region and nationally.
Yeah, I mean, the goals that I set with my leadership team were numerous. I mean, and you know, the first, of course, was to develop a strategic plan. And the initial strategic plan had 5 goals. Goal number 1 was student success, increasing the success of our students. And we had numerous objectives that we identified that we felt would improve the success, improving academic advising, improving academic support services, increasing the number of HIPS, high impact practices like study abroad opportunities and internship opportunities, increasing a sense of belonging, addressing, you know, this imposter syndrome, et cetera, et cetera. So again, you know, student success is an ongoing, you know, we have not, I can't tell you today that, oh, okay, we have achieved that goal. That goal continues to, as you mentioned early in this conversation, how is Cal State San Bernardino ready to embrace our students where they are and help them graduate? Goal number 2 in our 2015-2022 strategic plan, that was the time frame. We're now engaged, by the way, in the next iteration of our strategic plan. We're right as we speak, we are developing the next iteration of our strategic plan. The second goal was faculty and staff success, because we felt that our students cannot be successful unless our faculty and staff are successful. And so the 2 primary objectives, which we accomplished, was to develop a faculty center for excellence, a comprehensive faculty development center, so that our faculty who we recruit have the opportunity to develop their scholarship, to develop their pedagogy, to become more effective teachers, to help them be more successful in their professorial activities and goals. And that has resulted in some real tangible results. I mean, we are now an R2, Research 2 institution, just recently identified by Carnegie. And you don't become an R2 unless you have a very significant research portfolio. So we've increased our sponsored research metrics significantly. That does not happen unless faculty, primarily faculty, some staff, write competitive grants and are funded by federal agencies. That is a direct result of the Faculty Center for Excellence and the Office of Sponsored Research and the Office of the Graduate Associate Provost for Research and Graduate Studies. All of those units working together to improve faculty, professional development of our faculty. We also opened up a staff development center because we wanted our staff to be able to grow professionally. And we provide a number of programs that help our staff develop professionally. Whether you're a secretary or whether you're a vice president, there are opportunities for you to continue to grow professionally. The third goal we had in our initial strategic plan was diversify our resources and sustainability. And so that goal focused on fundraising. We have raised in our initial philanthropic comprehensive campaign, we raised $54 million. We're now in a $200 million campaign, in a blended campaign, where we've raised about 80% of that number. We have increased, as I mentioned, sponsored research dollars, funding from National Science Foundation, NIH, other U.S. Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Education. So we've increased the number of grants and contracts that we have. And so really looking at ways to diversify our revenue streams beyond simply the state appropriation and tuition revenue. Fourth goal is civic engagement. And how do we support our faculty, staff, and students in serving the community? I mentioned earlier, our faculty, staff, and students contribute more than 95,000 hours. We are, in fact, we recognized by the Carnegie as a community engaged institution. And then our last goal was branding. Really, when we brought together the university community to develop the strategic plan, what came out of those meetings, those town hall meetings with members of the university community, was that we really needed to figure out what do we want to be when we grow up as a university. Mm-hmm. And so, we developed a strategic communications unit and really sharpened how we told our story, both internally and externally. So one of the goals was to develop a strategic plan. Another goal was to improve our accreditation status. So we just recently completed our regional accrediting process with the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. We got a full 10-year reaccreditation. That's an A+ by our regional accrediting body. And so that's one part of the accreditation challenge. The other is every single one of our academic programs that have a national accrediting, we are accredited. So AACSB in business, or ABET in our computer science, or nursing, or social work. We have every single academic discipline that has a national accreditation process. We have achieved that accreditation. In fact, we have an art museum that's nationally accredited. That was another major overarching goal when I arrived in 2012. Ultimately to advance the university, to improve our graduation rates, which we have done. It's a challenge because we work with first generation students. We work with students who often have to stop out in order for them to work, to support their family. The pandemic has been a major, as you mentioned in your question, the pandemic has been a major challenge for us. We serve a very poor student population. Poor, rich in terms of family, in terms of what they bring to the university, but in terms of socioeconomic status, our median family income of our students is very, very low. So what am I saying here? The parents of many of our students, when they could not work from home, when their restaurants closed up, when their employer closed down because of the pandemic, they were out of work. Yep. And many of our students had to drop out to find work to help their families put food on the table. We did take a dip in our enrollment. We're now coming back. I think we're gonna come back. We were, for the first 8 years of my presidency, we saw significant enrollment growth. And for the last 3 years, we have seen a dip. Not significant. I mean, one of the major challenges for us is that, and you've, I'm sure, reported on this at Diverse Issues in Higher Ed, is the significant decline in the community colleges enrollment.
Exactly.
And we've experienced that in our region. We work with 12 community colleges. All of them have had very significant decline in enrollment. And given that 50% of our transfer students, that has impacted our enrollment. And then managing the pandemic, ensuring that our community is safe. We communicate with our students, faculty, and staff. We've developed the opportunity when we close down for students to continue their education remotely. We have a very robust food and housing security program. So students who find themselves, we've addressed food and housing insecurity needs of our students. This has been a real challenge for us because it's been a challenge in our region to address the manifestations or the results of our region. We did convene a group that looked at what does the university look like post-pandemic. So we do have a post-pandemic task force report that really looked at, what is going to be our new normal in terms of the pandemic. And as you mentioned, we're not over yet. I mean, I took a test the other day when I was feeling like I had a cold coming on. The first thing I did was got a COVID test and made sure that I was not positive before I came into the office. So, I mean, this is the kind of activity. When we had during in the middle of the COVID crisis, we had testing on our campus for free. We had we were providing vaccine on campus. We were administering vaccines on campus. It was a real challenge for sure.
My last question for you is personal. At this point, still energizes you for this work. Of course, in your bio, it's noted that you have served, extensive in terms of the profile of the institutions that you have served. It's really, really unique in terms of both geographically and the institutional profile of the institutions that you have served. And so my last question for you is personal. At this point, what still energizes you for this work and what keeps you in this work, given other opportunities that I'm sure that have come your way in your time in California?
Well, what gets me up every morning is my students and my faculty and staff. I mean, we're transforming the lives of students, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, that's why I get up. I just turned 69 last August. I'm in my 46th year. I certainly could retire if I chose to. I am a first generation EOP graduate. I draw my energy from the students that I serve. That's what keeps me up. That's what keeps me going, my friend, is working with students. And I wanted to just share, I am very much a big fan of Black issues. I still call it Black issues in higher ed.
Yeah.
No, and I do. And I remember as a young administrator, I went to MIT. The MIT had hosted first national conference on Blacks in higher education. And I know that Black issues was there, the leadership, Matthews, no?
Yes.
Yeah. And I was young. I was very junior. I drove up to Boston to attend that conference. So, what drives me is that when you look at the data, we as African American and Latino, we have not made the progress that we should have been. We should have.
Absolutely.
We're not there.
Absolutely.
We still have a lot of work to do. And MSIs and HBCUs and HSIs are not getting the kind of support, and tribal colleges and universities are not getting the support that this country should be providing. And that's that's what keeps me going. I mean, serving our students, but also part of the higher ed industry, if you will. We continue to be underrepresented. We meaning those institutions that serve predominantly low income, first generation, and racially underrepresented students are still very segregated in higher ed. If you look at the data, and when you look at Ivy League, when you look at the flagship R1 institutions, we're not there. We're concentrated in HBCUs and HSIs, minority serving institutions. And so I think it's important. That's why, your publication plays a very, very important role in telling the narrative in higher education. So continue to do the work that you do.
Well, Dr. Morales, thank you so much for your generous words of affirmation. We appreciate it. You would think after, since 1984, since we founded, but it's interesting that our articles tend to be along the same themes. 30, 40 years later, we're talking about the same issues because we're still in it. So
yeah, you're in the fight, man. You're in the
appreciate
fight.
your support, words of affirmation. I appreciate your time, Dr. Morales. I know that.
Hey, don't hesitate to reach out to me if I can be of any help to you in any way, please.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. Take care. All right, appreciate you. All right.